Welcome to another developer retrospective. Recently, I had a conversation with someone about the gaming industry and how they had a strong desire to pursue game design and development as a career. They asked me if I thought that if it was a fool's dream, to which I encouraged them saying, no, it's totally something that they should try to do. It is a difficult path to success and recognition, but they should pursue their dream. We talked about some of our favorite developers and games we like to play, and I mentioned Reiko Kodama to them. It piqued their interest and they asked me for more information about her. I told them about some of the fantastic games that she worked on and how she was a pioneer in the industry full of men, a woman who was the queen of Japanese RPGs. Later, sitting at home, I did a quick Google search on her and found that there was a surprising lack of content about her online. In light of her quiet passing in 2022, it seemed like an important topic to cover. She is the first lady of Japanese RPGs, an influential developer at SEGA Japan, and a talented artist who made a name for herself in the mostly boys' club environment of the 80s and the 90s. This is the story of Reiko Kodama, SEGA's Phoenix. Born in May of 1963 in Yokosuka, Japan, in high school, Kodama got into designing advertising materials and art. She furthered this passion in college after pursuing studies in archaeology, but then settling back into art as a career, pursuing graphic design. But her real desire was to create her own works, and she believed that she could find opportunities in the burgeoning field in desperate need of artistic talent, the video game industry. In 1984, she was hired by SEGA, beginning a long and prosperous affiliation she would maintain throughout the rest of her career. Her first assignment was as character designer for the arcade game Champion Boxing. Champion Boxing is a 1984 SEGA SG-1000 and MSX game, which was the first game of equally famed SEGA developer Yu Suzuki. Suzuki described the game as a test bed to teach developers about game development. But SEGA must have been impressed, as the game was ported to arcades by simply putting an SG-1000 into an arcade cabinet with the game installed.
そうですね、担当したタイトルはチャンピオンボクシングというタイトルでした。で、こちらは鈴木優さんがプログラマーで、石井さんという方が企画で、ほとんど3人で作り始めたんですけども、途中でですね、私が非常にまだそうですね、この仕事を始めてまだ半年も経っていない時だったので、非常に何ですかね、各デザインの方で悩んでしまった時に、川崎さんという先輩がですね、私の指導をしてくださいまして、今のチャンピオンボクシングというゲームの方が出来上がっています。非常にボクシングゲームなんですけども、コミカルなキャラクターで皆さんに喜んでいただけたものだと思っています。
From there, her next assignment was the arcade title Sega Ninja in 1984. But she was constantly busy in the mid-80s, working on multiple games at once, designing characters and environments. At the same time, Sega was working with small development departments and was vastly understaffed, meaning that to work there you had to wear several hats at once. But Kodama was a talented artist and an invaluable contributor. She provided assets for Alex Kidd, Quartet, Fantasy Zone 2, Miracle Warriors, and the port of Black Onyx for the SG-1000. She did all this while serving as the editor of the newsletter Sega Players Enjoy Club. At the time, Sega staff were not allowed to put their real names in the credits of their games, so Kodama chose the pseudonym Phoenix Ray, inspired by the manga character Phoenix Ikki from Saint Seiya. Amid all the flurry of work, something happened in Japan that still influences the gaming world to this day. SEGA wanted a piece of this new market share that Dragon Quest created, and put together a team to create their own RPG. Kodama was made the lead designer for the game, and was tasked with creating the characters, 2D environments, and battle screens. And of course, NPCs. Star Wars was a global phenomenon at the time, and it created intrigue by combining Asian-influenced designs with the science fiction setting. Kodama flipped this influence, designing her characters as Western fantasy archetypes with a coating of science fiction. You guys know I love me some fusion genres, and Phantasy Star paved the way for one of my favorite games to come out later. In addition to the unique aesthetic and beautiful art, the goal was to make this game inspired by, but wholly different than Dragon Quest and every other RPG on the market at the time. Phantasy Star had a higher emphasis on the story. To drive that story, Kodama designed and implemented a female protagonist. I know Samus was technically first, but Samus being a woman was more of an Easter egg, not the game's focus. Plenty of people in 1986 played and beat Metroid, but probably did not even know Samus was a woman. Even the manual refers to her as a male. So to me, Kodama deserves a lot more credit for presenting the first fleshed out female character in gaming. Phantasy Star in general should get more attention than it usually does. It came out the same year as Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest II. Most of the development team was comprised of women, except for Yuji Naka and Hayashida, who led the game's development. But look at the art direction of this game. The characters, the backgrounds, the 3D maze dungeons, nothing else from the period could compete with its presentation. The real standout element of this game to me, though, is Alice. Take some notes, game devs. This is how you design a strong female protagonist. She's not a damsel in distress. She is on a mission to avenge her brother who died at the beginning of the game and is a strong, confident character from the start. Kodama delivers a design that is decidedly feminine, but not over-sexualized. It is something that I wish more RPG designers would do. If you want to experience Alice's story, try the PS2 port with a translation patch. The Master System version is a landmark for 1986 and has been ported all over the place. But the updated visuals, presentation, and mechanics of the PS2 remake make it much easier to get into. The game takes advantage of the increased hardware power on the PS2 to add more content, making it the definitive way to experience the game. I was really happy with how much fun I was having while recording footage from the PS2 version for this video. Kodama would be credited as an artist on a couple more games on the Master System before the Mega Drive/Genesis came out. Of course, she also worked on some landmark titles on the Genesis, including Altered Beast, Phantasy Star 2, Shadow Dancer, Sonic 1 and 2. With her talent, she was finally given her own project to direct, and it was a game series with which she already had a cultural impact. Phantasy Star 4 is widely regarded as the best game in its series, and comes up often in discussions related to the best RPGs of the 16-bit era, along with Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI. You can feel the influence of an artist and designer in this game who loved anime, science fiction, and fantasy. Look at these comic-style panels that are used to tell the story. This is such a great idea and fantastic choice for presenting the story inside the limitations of the hardware that I'm shocked more people didn't come up with it. Again, this game needs to get more love. It is not unknown, I'm not saying that, but more people need to play it. The macro system also deserves a special mention, as commands can be stored in a player-created macro and used by selecting them to speed up inputs. Again, why is this not more a common feature in RPGs? They were planning on remaking it in the vein of the Phantasy Star remake I mentioned for the PS2, and it's a crime that the game did not get made. SEGA seems content to continue to port it, which is fair because it holds up still. I must admit, though, that a port with the same care as the PS2 versions of 1 and 2 would be amazing. I plan on playing the remake of 1 and the Genesis version of 4 on the channel one day, so if you want to see that, let me know in the comments. Next, Kodama directed the license-based action RPG Magic Knight Rayearth for the Sega Saturn, in direct response to her success in directing Phantasy Star 4. Rayearth released in Japan for the console in 1995, but a troubled localization meant the game was not released abroad until 1998. Working Designs did the port. Working Designs has a bit of a reputation. Some people love their work and credit them with bringing over games that would never have otherwise been brought to the West. Others bemoan their trademark humor inherent in their translations, how they tended to mess with the difficulty balancing for games they ported. It is essentially a debate between purists and realists, and I'm not going to get into it here. It is essential to compare this game to its true contemporaries in 1995, and bear in mind that it's also a licensed title, which comes with its own challenges. It's difficult to gauge the game's merits with the US version. Working Designs extensively modified the presentation, story, and game code. To be fair, this was not wholly their fault, as a large portion of the source code was lost in a hard drive crash. Working Designs had no choice but to rebuild this code themselves. They did increase the difficulty level of the game. Being a licensed game, the RPG elements are more scripted in nature, with level ups and buffs happening to coincide with elements of the plot that are laid out by the original anime. The 3 playable heroines can be swapped by the player in real time to solve puzzles or to change combat attacks. An action game with light RPG elements, it was the last game released for North American market for the Saturn, despite being an early game in Japan. Kodama was invested in every aspect of Rayearth in Japan, including marketing and management. In fact, this involvement in the managerial affairs at SEGA led to a brief time away from active game development. She would not return until 1998, when she was asked to assist in development as a co-producer of Sega's Deep Fear. Deep Fear is a Resident Evil clone developed by Sega for Saturn players. Like Phantasy Star, it differs from its source material by leaning further into science fiction setting. Instead of being set at a mansion, the whole game occurs in an underwater research facility. Another key mechanic of the game that differentiates it is the air meter. Like ammunition, air is a resource in the lab, and it must be managed. Firing your weapon or staying in a room for extended periods of time will deplete the air, which must be recharged occasionally to progress. This is not my kind of game, but if you like classic Resident Evil, it is interesting oddity that might be worth your time. Kodama had been brought back into active game development, proving her ability to manage, direct, and produce games. Sega was struggling with the lack of third-party support for the Saturn, and they tasked her with Overworks, an internal developer in Sega that I should do a retrospective on wholly by itself one of these days. They were asked to produce an RPG for the console. Hot on the heels of the critically acclaimed but famously difficult to develop Panzer Dragoon Saga, 2 people literally worked themselves to death, Kodama and her team shifted development to the Dreamcast to take advantage of the new, more powerful, and easier to develop for new hardware. Compared to Panzer Dragoon, development for this new title went incredibly smoothly, despite Kodama's transition to a 3D RPG. Most 3D RPGs up to this point were still relatively two-dimensional when it came to their world design and the exploration principles related to their maps. Kodama was going to challenge that. In general, Kodama once again was going to take RPGs in a direction away from the status quo. From this ambition came Skies of Arcadia. At the time, the trend was for RPGs to be dark and gritty explorations of the human condition, exploring themes of loss, mental health, and eco-responsibility. They captured a mood prevalent in Japan and globally in the 90s that was perpetuated by the collapse of the economic stability of the 80s. But the human condition is about more than just struggle and strife. It's also about adventure and discovery. Kodama's vision was to make a game where the driving force was the spirit of discovery. You follow the exploits of Vice, a sky pirate of the Blue Rogues operating in the skies above Arcadia, robbing the rich to provide for the poor and oppressed. This game deserves a full review one of these days. I do not spend a lot of time on the game in these retrospectives, as the point is the developer's journey, but man, is this game something to experience. It is so refreshingly different from its contemporaries, and is another example that as much praise as it gets, its influence in the industry is just not given its proper due. It tugs so far away from convention in a generation that really should have listened more to the message it was trying to tell. In addition to 3D exploration and theming, Skies of Arcadia integrates its airships fully into its gameplay mechanics. There are 2 battle systems, one traditional and party-based, and the second airship combat, which is universally praised aspect of the gameplay. This game is very anime, and has an inspired, fully realized world to explore and discover. The colors are so bright and striking, you can feel the incredible art direction oozing from every corner of the game. Kodama said that it was her personal goal to do the cutscenes and cinematics in-engine, and the presentation of the game is high enough quality that the decision absolutely works and helps not to break the player's immersion. Play Skies of Arcadia if you can. It was given an enhanced port on the GameCube, the version of which I am showing footage here. I got pretty far into it a few years ago before I had to put it down for a move, and I plan to play it all the way through on this channel someday. With the Dreamcast's failure, the future of many SEGA developers was in question. After porting Arcadia to the GameCube, Kodama would work with SEGA on titles for the Nintendo DS, the PlayStation, and the PlayStation Portable. A notable series she produced during this time was Seventh Dragon, a Japanese exclusive RPG series released on the DS and PSP. For this retrospective, I played a translated version of the DS release. I like the art style and presentation, but I have to say that the difficulty level right out the gate was steep compared to other RPGs I've played before. It's very old school, throwing you into the wolves' den and making you grind from the start. That said, once I got a feel for it, I was having a good time. I think I will need to try this one again in the near future. I'm not sure what kept it from being released here in North America. Maybe the difficulty, maybe the translation hurdle, maybe, I don't know. But whatever was the reason, it wasn't a good enough one. This is really an RPG that we could have used over here. Kodama's last producer credit was on the Sega Ages, released in the Nintendo Switch, which contained several games that she worked on during the 8 and 16-bit era. But her last on-screen credit came with the release of the Sega Mini 2 on October 27th of 2022, where she was credited in memoriam. Concerned fans reached out to Sega, who confirmed that she had passed away on May 9th of the same year. At the request of her family, Sega and her colleagues had refrained from making a public statement. Later that day, when the news broke, Yuji Naka shared this tweet. Kodama did not want to spend her artistic talents trumpeting other people's work. That philosophy is why she left her future in advertising and joined Sega. Sega needed an RPG to take on the mighty Dragon Quest, but instead of making a copy of someone else's success, again, she designed a world and characters opposite to what was mainstream. She continued this pattern of iteration her entire career, not content with copying or trumpeting the trends prevalent at the time, but with making games that were brought to life by her own creative vision. Despite her humility, often giving credit to the team rather than to herself, she was a talented artist, developer, producer, and manager at Sega for over 30 years. Her creations, like a phoenix, give a lasting legacy that continues on even today. Her games inspire generations to explore and to create. Her contributions to the industry should be remembered and celebrated. Thank you, Kodama, for your wonderful games and characters. You rode on no one's coattails. You blazed your own trail into the industry to become the first lady of RPGs. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.